All right. Jason, you talked intangibles off the top in response to what Lincoln Riley had to say about new team, new year. You never know how the chemistry is going to be, the leadership. The other component that is non-existent from previous years is the addition of another year for pretty much everybody, but is most significant for those seniors or those players who would have lost eligibility, number one. Number two, for those guys that opted out for 2020. And, we can only conjecture, we can only look at the personnel addition going from 2019 now to 2021 for those particular players, but there's got to be some type of, chemistry, just getting them acclimated back into the football operation, number one. But number two, whatever the thoughts and feelings of the players are who participated and played through the season last year in 2020, it really can't be measured, but it's a dynamic that these coaches are going to have to deal with.
No, absolutely, Mark. And in terms of the opt-outs, Oklahoma has two players specifically, one on each side of the ball. Kennedy Brooks, from a running back perspective, who opted out in 2020, and then Jalen Redmond, and also on the defensive side of the ball. Now, look, the coaches, the players, they all said the right things in terms of chemistry on the offseason. Yeah, we fully support their decisions to stay back, to not participate. Every person has that right. Every person has that decision. So we'll see how that goes. I mean, I think one of the good things about both of those players is both of those have played a decent amount of football for Oklahoma. So I think, Kennedy Brooks was a back-to-back 1,000-yard rusher coming into 2020. Jalen Redmond had about 6.5 sacks in the 2019 season. So I think both of those kids have played a decent amount, and I think the team knows that both of those kids will be needed, potentially a starter on both sides of the ball. Kennedy Brooks, I think the big question coming in is, to your point, yes, a cohesiveness, yes, a chemistry issue, but what were they able to do in that full season of not playing football? For some of them, they had no affiliation with the team, no practice. What were they able to do in terms of working out to keep fresh, to keep to not be rusty? So you got to think Oklahoma from a running back perspective. You have Kennedy Brooks, certainly. You have Seth McGowan. You have Marcus Major that came in there. So all three of those guys will be competing, of course, with Eric Gray, who is a transfer from a transfer from Tennessee into Oklahoma. So I think that will be interesting to see exactly how quickly Kennedy Brooks gets back up to that 1-2 spot. Is he there? Has he worked well throughout the offseason? And then Jalen Redmond on the defensive line for Oklahoma. I think he's another guy that's could be counted on to be a starter among that defensive line. Interesting, the height and the weights came out the other day on the roster. So in his last game in 2019, Jalen Redmond was at 266. Now he's at 284. What does that look like? I think you're going to see him play inside more at the defensive tackle position, and then you'll see Isaiah Thomas kind of slide outside more at the defensive end to take advantage of both of their strong suits. But what kind of shape is he in? Where is he at mentally? He's struggled with blood clots throughout his career. So I think he was probably more accepted. It was really not even a second thought with his medical issues that he's had in the past. So I think having those two kids back in the fold and going through spring ball, having that spring practice this year is going to be completely invaluable for both of those kids. And you'd mentioned a couple of kids that that have the opportunity to come back as seniors. Caleb Kelly is one who's been with the program quite some time, had two, really catastrophic injuries. Early on, Riley had talked about how much of a leader he is on the defensive side of the ball. He talked about, from a vocal perspective, he was the unquestioned leader of that linebacker room, especially. And then Eric Swinson's another guy among the offensive line that came back for his second senior season. So he'll certainly battle with some of those kids. Anton Harrison at the tackle position, maybe Wanye Morris on the other tackle, depending on how Oklahoma Beatonville decides to do that. So 4 kids that are had the opportunity to come back this year that could be really a key part of the team in 2021.
So going back to 2019, as Jason mentioned, Kennedy Brooks with his second of 2,000-yard seasons, 6.5 yards per carry, 6 touchdowns, and also Redmond, in addition to the 6.5 sacks that Jason mentioned, 11 tackles for loss and 23 tackles, 11 behind the line of scrimmage. And Caleb Kelly's season was cut short, where it was almost non-existent in 2019. Jason Ray discussing Oklahoma football with us following Lincoln Riley's first spring news conference. March 22nd is the date. Mark it in your books. The Sooners hit the field for 15 sessions. Should be a good time, and hopefully we'll get some news out of spring practice to be able to report. In addition to that, Jason, do we know when the spring game is?
Yeah, it's going to be April 24th. They haven't identified a time for the kickoff, but the spring game is going to be on April 24th.
There we go. All right, Jason, appreciate you stopping by as always.
All right, thanks for having me on, Mark.